It's Sunday, March 28th, 2021, and this is The Truth as We Know It. Our purpose here is to reflect on current events and media and how they impact our thinking and our politics. Our goal is to look beyond the headlines and beneath the headlines to explore the foundations of our political leanings. I'm Michael Price in Louisville.
I'm Dustin Price in Chicago. Today we'll be discussing the works of Jonathan Haidt, and specifically a lecture on the moral roots of liberals and conservatives. Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist, an author, and professor of ethical leadership at New York University's Stern School of Business. His main areas of study are the psychology of morality and moral emotions. He's the author of The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion.
Let's start at the beginning. What is morality and where does it come from? The worst idea in all of psychology is the idea that the mind is a blank slate at birth. Developmental psychology has shown that kids come into the world already knowing so much about the physical and social worlds and programmed to make it really easy for them to learn certain things and hard to learn others. The best definition of innateness I've ever seen, this just clarifies so many things for me, is from the brain scientist Gary Marcus. He says, the initial organization of the brain does not depend that much on experience. Nature provides a first draft, which experience then revises. Built in doesn't mean unmalleable, it means organized in advance of experience. Okay, so what's on the first draft of the moral mind? To find out, my colleague Craig Joseph and I read through the literature on anthropology, on cultural variation and morality, and also on evolutionary psychology, looking for matches. What are the sorts of things that people talk about across disciplines, that you find across cultures and even across species? We found five best matches, which we call the five foundations of morality. The first one is harm-care. We're all mammals here. We all have a lot of neural and hormonal programming that makes us really bond with others, care for others, feel compassion for others, especially the weak and vulnerable, gives us very strong feelings about those who cause harm. This moral foundation underlies about 70% of the moral statements I've heard here at TED. The second foundation is fairness, reciprocity. There's actually ambiguous evidence as to whether you find reciprocity in other animals, but the evidence for people could not be clearer. This Norman Rockwell painting is called The Golden Rule, and we heard about this from Karen Armstrong, of course, as the foundation of so many religions. That second foundation underlies the other 30% of the moral statements I've heard here at TED. Third foundation is in-group loyalty. You do find groups in the animal kingdom, you do find cooperative groups, but these groups are always either very small or they're all siblings. It's only among humans that you find very large groups of people who are able to cooperate, join together into groups, but in this case, groups that are united to fight other groups. This probably comes from our long history of tribal living, of tribal psychology. And this tribal psychology is so deeply pleasurable that even when we don't have tribes, we go ahead and make them because it's fun. Okay. Sports is to war as pornography is to sex. We get to exercise some ancient drives. The fourth foundation is authority respect. Here you see submissive gestures from two members of very closely related species. But authority in humans is not so closely based on power and brutality as it is in other primates. It's based on more voluntary deference and even elements of love at times. The fifth foundation is purity, sanctity. This painting is called The Allegory of Chastity. But purity is not just about suppressing female sexuality. It's about any kind of ideology, any kind of idea that tells you that you can attain virtue by controlling what you do with your body, by controlling what you put into your body. And while the political right may moralize sex much more, the political left is really doing a lot of it with food. Food is becoming extremely moralized nowadays. And a lot of it is ideas about purity, about what you're willing to touch or put into your body. I believe these are the five best candidates for what's written on the first draft of the moral mind. I think this is what we come with, at least a preparedness to learn all of these things. But as my son Max grows up in a liberal college town, how is this first draft going to get revised? And how will it end up being different from a kid born 60 miles south of us in Lynchburg, Virginia? To think about cultural variation, let's try a different metaphor. If there really are five systems at work in the mind, five sources of intuitions and emotions, then we can think of the moral mind as being like one of those audio equalizers that has 5 channels where you can set it to a different setting on every channel. And my colleagues Brian Nozick and Jesse Graham and I made a questionnaire, which we put up on the web at www.yourmorals.org. And so far, 30,000 people have taken this questionnaire, and you can too. Here are the results. Here are the results from about 23,000 American citizens. On the left, I've plotted the scores for liberals. On the right, those for conservatives. In the middle, the moderates. The blue line shows you people's responses on the average of all the harm questions. So as you see, people care about harm and care issues. They give high endorsement of these sorts of statements all across the board. But as you also see, liberals care about it a little more than conservatives. The line slopes down. Same story for fairness. But look at the other three lines. For liberals, the scores are very low. Liberals are basically saying, no, this is not morality. In-group authority, this stuff has nothing to do with morality, I reject it. But as people get more conservative, the values rise. We could say that liberals have a kind of a two-channel or two-foundation morality. Conservatives have more of a five-foundation or five-channel morality. We find this in every country we look at. Here's the data for 1,100 Canadians. I'll just flip through a few other slides. The UK, Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, the East Asia, and South Asia. Notice also that on all of these graphs, the slope is steeper on in-group authority purity, which shows that within any country, the disagreement isn't over harm and fairness. Everybody, I mean, we debate over what's fair, but everybody agrees that harm and fairness matter. Moral arguments within cultures are especially about issues of in-group authority purity.
I seem to be here to represent the more radical leftist factions. A lot of fun. This video, man, this is so cool. I'm glad we can talk about this because I keep coming back to it, of this moral framework, and it's just so interesting. And I know, it's just a moral framework. It's not the truth, but it's so interesting. The question I wanted to get into, like, understanding how he breaks out the different pathways is cool, but it struck me as a tool to, okay, how do I think from the other side? And I put the shoe on the other foot. So it's like, it's easy for me to find, it's super easy for me to say what I'm for and why those other morals are wrong, right? But it's really difficult for me to think the other way of how my morals are wrong and the ones I think are wrong are right. It's like, yeah. The actual exercise of that is amazing.
Right. Well, I see it as you have these moral values. So I see it as the values that people have. I think authority is important, or I think purity is important, or I think justice is important, whatever it is. And I can see somebody who's really trying to get the right moral answer out of those. But the thing that strikes me is, what about these immoral people?
What are the immoral groups?
Yeah, the immoral people who, I want anything that doesn't harm me, but I don't care about the rest of the world. They have no empathy. It's only their self-interest that's at play. Unfortunately, I think those tend to be political leaders,
right?
Be a character that they have. And now back to the truth, right?
Right.
Do the people who really do have morals, even though they might be conservative morals, what is their truth?
Right. You're reflecting on we only hear the worst. It's the sensationalism.
Mm-hmm.
If you only hear the worst, you think that's true, but it's really not. It is true for a certain amount of people, but not for the majority. But it feels.
Yeah.
The other one was I listened to a show called Rising. I don't know if you ever saw that on YouTube.
I have.
It's neat. It's like a left-right perspective, but more of the modern populist left and the populist right. And it's interesting because it does fall into that of like most of what we talk about is the immoral view. And it's hard, they're out there to find actual moral conservatives. Like people are really interested in that, not just responding and reacting to this right culture war, but like finding a true conservative trying to do that. They're out there. Hard to find.
Yeah.
Out there.
Right. Well, they're hard to find because we don't talk to each other very much.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm guilty of, hanging out with people like your father, whose views are similar to mine.
Yeah. I was watching a buddy's Facebook post today, and he was talking about guns and of course mass shootings and in the news. And I'm like, and he was getting frustrated. And I'm like, I keep talking about it. I'm like, what is your question? I know you don't know any gun owners. What are you looking for? And like the cynical part of me is like, okay, what you're really asking is, how do I not get scared?
Yeah.
And it's a tough one to get to. And I'm like, I know I'm getting a little off topic and I'm still waiting for Paul to come in, but it was another question that's been in my mind. I know I'm wrong, but I don't know why. This was a thing I've heard some of my friends say is, if someone would just tell me the right thing to do, I would do it. And this question is bothering me like crazy because I'm like, how do you not know already? And maybe it's because I spent 20 years in social services and 20 more years hanging around hippies. The answers have always been around. Like, how do you not, are you actually asking, how do I win and feel righteous without any sacrifice on my part? And I'm like, okay, well, ask it that way and you'll realize you're asking the wrong question. It's like,
yeah.
Like we all knew, it's like, okay, well, if the banks are the problem, why are you banking with them? I was like, you know the answers. We've all know the answers. It's just, what are you going to have faith in?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, it's always hard to find the right path. And I go back to, speaking of old hippies, Carlos Castaneda and the Journey of Don Juan. You ever hear of those
Journey
books?
Dixland,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of his things was the warrior. And to be a warrior, your actions have to be impeccable. You know, you have to be above reproach. If you're on a path to achieve anything, you want to be sure you're modeling the right behavior, and you know, if you believe in justice and fairness and equality, everything you do has to support that.
Especially in this age of, I can look at your Facebook comments from 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, fine. I've never been on Facebook. Sorry.
Oh, good for you. We hope to break down this formula presented by Jonathan Haidt and apply it to the example today is going to be the pandemic response, mainly lockdowns and masks. I think we all have a good opinions on those, or large opinions. But we can also consider, if you want to talk about the other pandemic responses like UBI and Fight for 15 and Medicare for All, but it's mainly the lockdowns and masks. And the end goal is to be able to use this framework that Haidt gives us and maybe practice thinking from the other point of view on the different moralities that he lists out. We hope to break down the formula presented and apply it today to a current topic of pandemic response. I want to focus on lockdowns and masks. I think we all can have a lot of opinions on that. You can also cover UBI and Medicare for All and other pandemic responses, but the lockdowns and masks, I think, are a good, simple example of exploring moral frameworks. And the end goal today is to be able to formulate a positive moral response from the other side. It's really easy to do our own. Can we do a little devil's advocate, shoe on the other foot kind of thing? I love this exercise and I love this concept from Haidt. I'll start us off with one of my favorite quotes from Robert Heinlein, actually. Your enemy is never a villain in his own eyes. Keep this in mind. It may offer a way to make him your friend. So the gist of the video, and hopefully everybody's watching it, is we're all born with the innate ability to understand these 5 moral preferences. We all have this capability, but our environment and our choices determine which morals we kind of lean into. This is all about preference and spectrum. And the larger point is we are able to understand all the morals. We just, in general, prefer to concentrate on some. And remember, this is just a framework. This is an exercise. This is not the truth. So as the videos have said, the 5 moral pathways, just to list them out: harm and care, fairness and reciprocity, otherwise known as the golden rule, in-group loyalty and cooperation, authority and respect, and purity, sanctity.
What are you saying about the moral underpinnings of liberalism and conservatism? You were saying, well, that's fine for people who have a morality, but what about the people who have no morality at all? I don't know if I'm stating that the same way, but the question was, we think a lot about what is right, what's wrong, where we position ourselves, how we make decisions, who we vote for, what policies we endorse, and so forth. And there may be people who don't go through that process, who are reacting in other ways. So first of all, maybe you can help me with that. Is that?
No, I think that's a fair summary of what I said before, as well as I can remember. I'm an old guy.
Okay.
And I think thinking a little bit more about that dilemma and rewatching Haidt's TED Talk, I thought maybe he had some ideas in there that would help deal with those folks who are not really working on the moral spectrum, but just on their own self-interest. Because remember, he talked about the experiment where there was a social game and people could give some of their money to contribute to a common good,
right.
But they started holding back more and more until they put in punishments, and then the donations went back up.
Yeah.
So it might be that a system of punishments for those people who don't have morals would be one way to deal with them.
Yeah. Well, what that triggered for me, and I was thinking about this after we spoke, and I recall this discussion of morality from college courses I took in existentialism and religion classes, basically theology classes. And the basis of morality is something that a lot of writers, I mean, notably Immanuel Kant, has dealt with the idea of what exactly is morality. And the one that I was trying to delve into this some more, and I remember reading in Piaget a long time ago his discussion of kind of an evolving morality. It's almost akin to the kind of Freudian idea of ego and superego, the evolution of our ability to perceive others and ourselves. And the notion is that our morality evolves. So we first learn what the rules are if we're children. Your young children are taught, you don't cross the street without hold my hand, and don't go near the fire, and you learn the rules. And what they're concerned with is understanding the rules, and they really don't question the rules. They accept the authority of their parents, whoever it might be. But as we grow older, an adolescent begins to question, well, who made this damn rule? Well, who says I can't do this? And I think eventually, as you mature, you come to the point of saying, well, I understand the need for the rules, so I'll support them in the interest of, the society I live in. I'll support the rules. So I'm not just going to reject all the rules. I'm not going to become an anarchist. I'm going to accept those rules. And my question is there anything underpinning our political leanings that's tied to that sense of moral maturity? I guess I could just say, it seems to me a lot of people who had, invaded the Capitol in January were essentially immature. They were moved by something. Obviously, they thought they were right about something, but their assessment of the facts was not a very mature one. So that's kind of what I wanted to dig back at. And I don't know, Dustin, you were talking about a different take on that. I don't know if you want to pick up at that point or not.
when we talk about morality, again, it's not, just careful on words here. It's not rules, it's the justification for the rules. So it's the right or wrong, right? And we all have morality. No one does. The only people without actual morality are psychopaths. And so we all have this feeling of right or wrong. And a lot of it is a social unconscious kind of thing. You know, we follow the rules to be a good person. That's the morality and the rules of it. And so we all kind of, in our little micro transactions with each other through our whole life, billions and billions of them, we realize what feels right and feels wrong. And then you've also got when you bring up the capital people, your irrational behavior can sometimes skirt morality. So if you are in a very irrational state through fear or anger, you skirt morality. So there's that part. But I am very interested in the question of people who don't have morality. Now, one, I kind of define that everybody does, but it comes back into how mature is your morality? Now I get to the question of, okay, who am I to say what's mature or not? Like, am I being, I forgot what the word, condescending in this take? This is where I get back to when progressives especially talk, we always talk about facts and throw out the facts and facts and facts. And I was trying to say before, facts are meaningless without context, without a social context and a personal context. So facts don't matter, feelings do, actually. You know, we interpret everything through our morality and our feelings. So yelling facts at people doesn't work. Especially, you know, you have to make emotional arguments. And I think that's the one thing of the progressive, like on the right wing, you can see it much more clearly. On the left wing, I would like to have more left-wing moral philosophers. This is why I go back to the hippies. This is why I go back to the church camps of like, okay, we have all these facts or whatever, but why are we doing this? Why do I think I'm a better person than you? Why?
Mm-hmm. Well, I find that interesting. I mentioned to Dustin before, one of the examples that Jean Piaget cites is a case of two little girls. One little girl is trying to fix her mother's dress, and then she takes scissors and makes a pattern in the dress and basically ruins the dress. The other little girl is playing with the scissors and puts a slight damage on her mother's dress because she's being careless. Now, if either of these two deserve some sort of admonition, what's more egregious, ruining the dress or intentionally or through negligence causing damage? I don't know if I'm making that clear or not, but is it the fact that the dress was ruined is more important and that kid deserves more punishment, even though her intentions were good, or the person with dubious intentions who causes a small damage? In other words, if somebody accidentally backs their truck over my garden, should I be madder at them than a guy who comes along and chops down one of my plants? You know, is it the amount of damage or is it the intention behind the act? Does that tie in with what you're saying, Dustin?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Paul, you're kind of quiet there. I want to open this up. I don't know if this is your well, go ahead.
Well, you know, one of the things that I thought about, you know, in the whole thing, you know, and even Haidt said this in his beginning thing, one of the things that we have where we have morality, you know, really early on is it comes out of children. And if you've ever been around you've been around a group of children and somebody takes something and you hear, you know, that's not fair. It's not fair, because they understand it. They can't verbalize it particularly, but they can understand, you know, some action as being not fair, not a good action with respect to other people. And it you know, it starts off pretty early in life. I mean, you know, you don't have to wait till they get to be 5 or 6. I mean, by a year and a half, they're pretty much telling, you know, defending themselves in ways that come out like that. So the whole morality thing is insanely complex because we have so screwed it up. Because the only thing in America that really matters is money and property. And so as long as you don't steal the money and steal the property, you can pretty much do what you want. And you can't. There's a physical attraction. I mean, obviously you can't rape people and that sort of thing. Well, you can if you're a politician, but you're not. It really. I mean, I think about how that stuff starts off, and I compare how I felt when I was a small child, and either got screwed out of something or did something that got my butt whipped, which they did back in the day. And like, okay, that was pretty much appropriate for the time. I don't believe in capital punishment board, no, but I also don't believe in letting kids just get away with all kinds of crap. So,
when you're talking about this developing early, is it your first experience? You mentioned getting spanked or getting disciplined as a child. Is it okay? I remember in my own case, I accidentally broke the china cabinet front.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Accidentally.
Which no, I mean I did. I just bumped into it. I didn't do anything. Well, I got severely punished for that, even though I didn't intend to do it. I wasn't maliciously doing it, but it was the degree of harm. So that affected that was from my father more than my mother, and it affected my relationship with him. I don't know how it may have complicated things. And Dustin, you might have some examples that relate to me too. But is it an experiential thing? You mentioned it growing, starting out early. Is it the kind of experiences you have? If you have a parent who, you break something that is valuable to them, and they say, "Oh, I know you didn't mean to do it. It's okay," or they fly off the handle and get really, really angry. Is that response what triggers the creation of your own sense of right and wrong?
Well, it's not necessarily that extreme, but a lot of that is that way. I mean, you learn. Don't break the dishes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is one of the minor thing. We don't. You got to be careful with them when you're doing stuff. And so the question really is what kind of a program that the parent applies to that to make it quote stick. We're gonna make you feel bad because I did that, and of course the old stuff out of the early part of the 20th century was a little bit harsh.
Yeah.
And so we came away from that thinking, and I think that's for like the baby boomers, that's a whole big source of that problem for those of us that are in that age, is that the old man and the mother were always had the belt handy.
Yeah.
And would apply it, and in order to get you to do what they want you to do.
I wanted to ask about the can you have morality without empathy? And I'll get there real quickly of like what Paul was saying. In childhood development, now there is a flipping point. There's the first morality of the child. They only think about themselves before they understand other people exist, and so it's, do I get it or not? If I don't get it, if I don't get that cookie, then that's an immoral act because I didn't get my thing.
Yeah.
Until you realize other people have feelings and you actually feel that, then morality comes closer to empathy of, am I harming that person or not? And then as we have all these interactions socially, we have this subconscious social morality. And I noticed, at least in our circles, in more left circles, it's about empathy towards the other. Now, can we, as leftists, I know this is going to be hard, imagine a morality that is less on empathy, or at least treats empathy differently? Like, I understand the morality of, I'm causing you harm and I can feel the harm in you, therefore I know it's bad. What would be a morality skirting that a little bit? Like, not skirt, because one, can you have morality without empathy, or can you have a morality with empathy is not the primary focus?
Well, I guess it depends on how you define morality. Steve,
knowing right or wrong. That's
well, let me bring a more contemporary example. people respond differently to the idea of immigrants on the border. Okay.
Okay.
On the one hand, someone says, look, we have a border. You have to defend the border. You can't just let people cross the border. That's the rule.
Right.
On the other hand, you say these are poor people coming from a terrible situation, and all they're trying to do is save their children. So are these two different moralities? The morality that says we must, we got rules, got to enforce the rules. Or do we allow our empathy to say, well, let's set the rules aside? And if so, I mean, if that's the case, that we're going to set the rules aside, what's the rule for change for setting the rules aside? I mean, how do you determine, but what I consider empathetic may not be the same thing as you. Steve, I want to hear your comment on that. I don't know if I'm pursuing a blind path here or not, but what I'm trying to do is identify why people respond different ways to different stimuli politically. And is it based in their internal sense of morality? Is it something they were taught? What are your thoughts?
Well, I thought Haidt made some good points there, that openness versus stability. You don't want change, or you do want change. And so that the people who are afraid of the impact of the changes caused by immigration, they would emphasize the order, that we have rules, we should follow those rules. People shouldn't just be coming into the country willy-nilly. And the people who are open to change are thinking, as we just mentioned, we feel for those people. They're having a big dilemma, and they need some help, and we need to think about how we help them. So also think about the morality without empathy. That might have been what I was describing when I thought about these amoral people. Yeah, they have their own sense of morality. I think they think they're right. I think that's a good takeaway from the whole Haidt talk, is everybody thinks they're right.
Yeah.
And if you want them to change what they think is right, how do you engage with them is the challenge.
Mm-hmm. It's literally impossible to think you're wrong. It's like you can to know you're wrong but think you're right. It's an brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now this is what you said was really interesting, because it brings me back to, and this is a quote from sci-fi that I love. It was like, you can have the belief that you can make other people better, and I simply do not hold with that. I don't think you can make other people better. You can suggest things.
Right.
The only thing you have control over yourself. So it comes down to if it's more of the morality, like especially with immigration, it's like I am being empathetic towards my own people. I'm going to say, okay, well, the government is not supporting me. My government is ignoring me and helping someone who's not a citizen. So it's beyond the just follow rules. It's what does it mean to be American? And it also is, and whether I'm going to label this poorly, but of like, okay, well, you're destroying what it means to be me. If we can no longer be white people, then it goes to that extreme. Like, I'm going to skip over that real quick. It's back to the making people better. So there's this idea of others versus self. And I'll get this to when you're talking about like parenting. Like, if you just tell me the facts and the rule and like hammer this, like do this, I'll learn that, but more as a reaction to the father figure, as opposed to understanding me and letting me figure it out. Maybe I get it right or wrong. I'm kind of veering off topic, but it's the idea of, do you change yourself or do you change other people? Am I the mother or the father? Am I nurturing you and letting you do this and maybe you can figure it out, or I'm molding you? So we take this, I'm on this new path of taking this morality back to your personal, I don't have a word for it, trajectory. Am I going to spend my time making myself a better person and understanding the right? or I'm going to take the time and displaying to the right how they're being immature.
Okay, so whether you're positive or whether you're reactive, I guess the typical, or I guess the cliche example is the lifeboat. We talk about lifeboat ethics or morality, and it seems to me, if you had imagine two lifeboats, one filled with conservatives and one filled with liberals. The conservatives are going to be concerned about, how much space do we have here, and we're not going to take on anybody else if that's going to, and maybe they're even thinking about, well, we're out in the middle of the ocean, even though we might be able to take them on now, the survival, to shore means we can only, let's say, have 12 people. The liberals, on the other hand, see people drowning in the water, and they keep taking them on with the danger of overloading the boat and sinking it. So those seem to be the extremes, and you can play that against the discussion now on the latest infrastructure package. It's the same thing. That are we going to do what needs to be done for the people, even though it costs an enormous amount of money, or are we going to be concerned about fiscal responsibility and let some things fall through the cracks? So it seems to me there's an undercurrent. I guess that's what I'm trying to say today, is that there seems to be something underneath this. It's like the difference between the continents and the tectonic plates. The plates determine the surface level, and there are movements down below that you're either concerned about, as you were saying, Dustin, the feelings or the facts. If you're concerned about the facts, I've run into this, I don't know how many times, in budget discussions. Oh, we have to spend this, but we don't have this.
And I'll interject.
We have to spend it. We just have to. Well,
Yeah.
we don't have it. It's that dichotomy.
The people on the left, I'll interject, the people on the left keep bringing up facts. They need to bring up morality because they don't care about the facts either.
Right.
No one cares about facts. They care about being right. So come up with a leftist morality. I want a socialist commie preacher talking to me.
Yeah.
Well, there's truth in both the feelings and in the fact. And the trick is to combine them and balance them.
Well,
that's what a socially commie preacher would say.
Yeah, that's what I think. I hear people say this on newscasts all the time, that the majority of Americans want to see all the partisan bickering stopped, and they want to do, they want a more centrist approach that does the right thing. And I think there's something to that. Unfortunately, the way we've structured the politics is in this standoff, where if you do something, I'm going to contradict you. In other words, we're not going to talk about the goal and talk about options that we have irrespective of our political party. No, we come in with a set of talking points and we're going to stick with those. So both sides have become rigid. Both sides have taken that on. I think, one of the things I was struck by in the Haidt talk was, if you remember the charts, and I guess I should put the charts up here, but if you recall, he was saying in the various levels, he talked about the harm, care, and fairness and reciprocity, but in authority and respect and purity and sanctity. Liberals considered those very low on the spectrum of importance, whereas conservatives consider them very high. So this idea of authority and purity, it seems to me to correspond to the notion of I'm not going to accept something. I don't know how to say it. I'm going to be reluctant to accept anything new because I want to maintain a stability. I want to keep my life.
Sometimes it's better to deny an opportunity than invite disaster.
Right.
I mean, it's at one point you're basically making an argument for the government as the arbiter of all moral deeds, and I kind of don't think that's the case. Without meaning without claiming having to put up the usual ruling that I'm not a right winger by any stretch, but nonetheless, the government is not. I mean, you see how when the government tries to deal with morality and on an individual level, they fuck it all up pretty much across the board. Look at what happened. Here comes these people. The only reason that one 12-year-old kid that they found walking in the desert got someplace where they could get him back to his parents was that he happened to get someplace where there was a TV camera.
Mm-hmm.
And so that this basically says that for us in the government, morality is to be arbitrated and discussed and argued about and voted on and so forth. So it's not very inflexible. It's highly fluid to the point of almost being meaningless. It's whatever people decide. Oh, today I'm going to decide, because there are certain kinds of deeds that are inherently good and certain kinds of things that are inherently bad. Murdering somebody is pretty much always considered an evil act, and so you see what I'm saying. It ain't. There's nothing simple about it. Mm-hmm. No matter how we'd like to come up and say, well, X and then Y and then we'll get Z every time. But no, we have to teach people to begin with to be moral from the beginning as children, which is where the government can have some effect if they had, provided nursing care home. But they sitting for their children while parents are in school or working. Yeah, I mean, it's. I listened to that whole thing twice, and I thought, well, yeah, I've been here and thought about these things, but his strategy, his solution is not original.
No, it's not original. It's the same thing I keep coming back to of you just do the random acts of kindness. Like you do, like these are the things the hippies and the priests taught me of, it doesn't matter what anybody else does. You have to make yourself better. It's like you do that. It's an act of faith. And how do you have faith without religion? Well, I'll tell you.
That brings up something else I'm interested in pursuing. We oftentimes accuse folks on the right, at least a large portion of them, of being overly influenced by evangelicalism and their theology and their church and so forth. Look at the issue of masks. Are people on the left not treating the issue of masks in the same way that they say the scientists told us, so we're going to do it? And we're treating science, even though I believe in science personally, but we treat science as a new form of religion. If it's said, and proven, so they're supposedly proven in science, then we accept that. And a preacher like Anthony Fauci comes on TV and tells us something, we follow what he says. And there's not a lot of difference between, you can argue the right and wrong of it, but in terms of the operational dynamic, there's not a lot of difference between that and having some preacher tell you something to do from pulpit and following their advice. And I think, Dustin, one of the things you were reaching at before is your criticism of liberals, and I share with you the idea that they're not developing a morality that is defensible. They want to assume, well, it's let's take science, and you pick your issue, pick climate science or whatever you might choose. And there's a tendency among liberals to be just as compliant with authority as people on the right are with religion.
And it's a little, the odds are a little bit better for science because I can reproduce it. Right, that's why science has a little bit of an edge. But I think the bigger problem, we got to take it one step further. Like I can hear the science about masks. I'm like, okay, that all makes sense. Okay, I'll do it. But the triggering point is when someone doesn't do it. So now we're in the fight for or against kind of thing, where, okay, I'm doing my science thing, I'm wearing my mask, everything's groovy. This group of people is rejecting that. Now I'm focused on them. Now they're an enemy. Now there's that and the other. I noticed this whenever, I think we mentioned this before, of whenever we're doing political discussions, when I'm talking about what I'm for, conversations go well. When I'm talking about what I'm against, it goes poorly. Like when I'm talking in 2016, when I'm talking to Hillary Clinton potential voters, they were only against Trump. They were against Republicans. They weren't for any, like, well, the ones I talked to weren't for a damn thing. They were against something. Now, we could both be against Reagan conservatism and we think we're allies until I start saying what I'm for. And I'm like, I'm for a $50 livable wage because I've been under the bottom, you know, I've been poor. You've had health insurance your whole life. Once I'm starting about what I'm for, then we start disagreeing, because then I'm like, okay, well, are you going to challenge this person and get me a minimum wage? It's like, well, no, we got to stop Trump. So it's always about what you're against. And when you start doing this patterning of what you're against, it makes you feel like you're on the same side, but you're not. So, and then when I started talking about what I was for, and it didn't feel like they didn't feel like I was attacking them.
Yeah. Keep in mind, you know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, but that's a purely transactional and very.
Got some ways we do have some ways of measuring some of this, so it's not all.
Yeah.
You know,
My big thing is like, do you know your principles? Most people, I don't know if they can answer that question.
I feel like if you build a team of things with people who are all for the same thing, it's a better team than that you're all against something.
Yeah.